Okay, welcome to, let's see, this will be November. Welcome to the Coaching Hour in November 2014. I've got several little small business things of business to talk about, and then we're going to venture off into our main topic tonight, which is what beginners should learn in the beginning of the game that will help them progress into the intermediate phase of the game, or said another way, what did you guys not do that when you got to the intermediate phase you had to go back and do or redo or relearn? And we'll get to that in just a minute. Last month we talked to John Poe about his first nationals experience, and I have to tell you, he was a little overwhelmed. But John and his mom and his dad came to the RV 3 times. The first time they came to the RV, and he was a little under the weather. He wasn't doing quite as well, and I said, look, quit trying to shoot a score. You're here to learn things. Learn something in every event, in every station you go from. Your goal needs to be to every station you walk out of to have learned something. Be better than you were when you walked in, when you leave the station. Get back into process. And he did a good job of that. I have to tell you that his dad and his mom both said, you know, you guys, thank you guys very much, simply because almost everything that we talked about, well, Shane might have had a few way out experiences, but most of the things that we talked about that could possibly happen to him happened to him, including being coached by people. And it did help him get through that experience. We all know that there's nothing like your first national championship experience. It's just an amazing thing. And I've said to many people, you've got to go to that event 5 years in a row before you can ever even think about competing. So I also talked to one of our young shooters out of Oregon named Lonnie, who was there with his mom and his grandparents. He called me the first day and said, Mr. Ash, I'm shooting like crap. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I shot a 35 on the first course. And I said, come by the RV. And they immediately pulled up over there, and I said, look, you're trying to shoot a score, aren't you? Yeah, I'm trying to do good. I said, stop. It ain't going to work. Go back to what we talked about when we were in Oregon 2 months ago. Process. Make the plan, shoot the plan. Stay within yourself. Pick your break points. Nothing else happens. Nothing else matters. Pick your break points. Shoot the bird in the break points. Go on. And I'm preaching to the choir, I understand, but I want to get this on the tape in case they listen to it. It began to work, and both Lonnie and John shot really well the rest of the weekend. I talked to Bill Smith and Richard Dooley about the same experience. These are 2 older guys that came from Birmingham, Alabama. Been shooting in the woods over there and never saw anything. Never saw as many crossing targets as they saw at the national championship, and they had their mouth open and were panting for a while. But I just explained to them, you're not here to win. You're here for the experience and to learn from everything you can learn from. This isn't a local Georgia shoot. This is the national championship. And you're not going to see chip shots here. I thought the targets were great. I thought there were a lot more good long crossing targets this year than I've seen at that championship in the 25 years we've been shooting it. I enjoyed them. Anyway, I wanted to let y'all know what I found out about those. And this goes back to one of the things that Gary and I gleaned from the Golf Flow book, which was if you understand the pattern, it takes panic out of the situation. And because I understood the pattern so well, I was able to take the panic out of these 3 groups of guys' situation and get them back into shooting better. I want to speak to 2 things which I'm going to do for the next 6 or 8 months. I'm going to pull 2 things out of the Golf Flow book and just kind of go over them, just as things to think about. Gio Villante referred to something that he called normative failure. Successful people are the ones that fail the most and keep on persisting. When failure is the norm, when you understand how to cope with failure, resilience becomes second nature. I'll say that again. When failure becomes the norm, or when you understand how to learn from failure, resilience becomes second nature. Failure is very much a part of the learning curve, which I think is something that beginners need to admit to themselves and build on. One other thought from the Golf Flow book: the links between conscious control and effort are abundant. By trusting your habits and engaging in implicit rather than busy and verbally explicit thinking, you are essentially reducing the communications between the motor and non-motor regions of the brain. A gradual withdrawal of conscious, particularly verbal thoughts about the golf swing occurs as a golfer slides into flow. As control gradually rises, the game of golf should feel more effortless. This is why verbalizing the problem and even verbalizing the command to fix it is confusing to the brain and inhibits flow. I'm going to read that one more time because I want you all to understand how confusing it is to carry on a conversation with yourself about the predicament you find yourself in and try to verbally fix it. Tell yourself, Gil, do it this way. Don't do it that way, Gil, do it this way. The links between conscious control and effort are abundant. By trusting your habits and engaging in implicit thinking, trusting your habits, rather than busy and verbally explicit thinking, oh, God, what do I have to do to fix it? Oh, I got to do this. I got to do that. You are essentially reducing the communications between the motor and non-motor region of the brain. A gradual withdrawal of conscious, particularly verbal thoughts about the golf swing occurs as the golfer slides into flow. As control gradually rises, the game of golf should feel even more effortless. This is describing the zone. It's damn near impossible to be in the zone if you keep going back to conscious verbal analyzation and conscious verbal commands about what you need to do. Mm-hmm. People talking to themselves, and you know it happens on the course. I'm just wanting to make you aware. This is why verbalizing the problem and even verbalizing the command to fix it is confusing to the brain and inhibits flow. That said, I want to talk to you about an article that Jeff Wolf sent me about the problem with positive thinking. You all have heard about positive thinking, but the research that this paper is talking about is the truth is that positive thinking often hinders us. Bear with me. I'm not going to read all of the studies. I'll read the first one. More than 2 decades ago, this fellow conducted a study in which he presented women enrolled in the weight reduction program with several short, open-ended scenarios about the future events. He asked them to imagine how they would fare in each one. Some of these scenarios asked the women to imagine that they had successfully completed the program. Others asked them to imagine situations in which they were tempted to cheat on their diets. I then asked the women to rate how positive or negative their resulting thoughts and images were. A year later, I checked on these women. The results were striking. The more positively the women had imagined themselves in these scenarios, the fewer pounds they had lost. Interesting study. Interesting study. Positive thinking fools our minds into perceiving that we've already attained our goal, slackening our readiness to pursue it. Pay attention here. This is some good stuff. Mm-hmm. Some critics of positive thinking have advised people to discard all happy talk and get real by dwelling on the challenges or obstacles. But this is too extreme a correction. Studies have shown that this strategy doesn't work any better than the other one. But what does work, now pay attention here, what does work better is a hybrid approach that combines positive thinking with realism. Here's how it works. Think of a wish. For a few minutes, imagine the wish coming true. Let your mind wander and drift where it will. But then shift gears. Spend a few more minutes imagining the obstacles that stand in the way of realizing your wish. This simple process that the researcher calls mental contrasting has produced powerful results in laboratory experiments. When participants have performed mental contrasting with reasonable, potentially attainable wishes, they have come away more energized and achieved better results compared with participants who either positively fantasized or dwelt on the obstacles. When participants have performed mental contrasting, now listen to this. Listen, this is really cool. When participants have performed mental contrasting with wishes that are not reasonable or attainable, because they've gone from the fantasy to the reality, they have disengaged more from these wishes. Whenever they are fantasizing about things that they cannot achieve because they've done the mental contrasting of what they'd love to happen, but what obstacles land in the way, they have disengaged more from these wishes. Mental contrasting spurs us on when it makes sense to pursue a wish and lets us abandon wishes more readily when it doesn't, so that we can go after other, more reasonable ambitions. In a recent study on a healthy eating exercise, we divided participants into two groups. Members of one group engaged in mental contrasting and then performed a planning exercise designed to help them overcome whatever obstacles stood in their way. 4 months later, members of this group were out working. They were working out twice as long each week as the control group and eating considerably more vegetables. In studies, we found that people who engage in mental contrasting recovered from chronic back pain better, behaved more constructively in relationships, got better grades in school, and even managed stress better in the workplace. You don't think your way to the right action. You've got to act your way to the right thinking. You can dream about it all you want to, but what this talks about is something that we've talked about and that I've worked with each and every one of you on, and that is put your goals out there, but let's look realistically at what you have to do to achieve those goals. Make that plan and work that plan. Bob, I'm coming to you now for a short synopsis on the paper you sent me on the difference in blocked and random practice and how contrary that is to most of the thinking in the coaching circles these days.
Okay. So I spent a lot of time looking at different types of practice, trying to figure out where's the best results. You've often been told that we can make you look good on any day, but that may not stick. And it turns out that usually that particular kind of practice means that we sat there and had you work on the same presentation over and over and over and over and over again. And many of you have reported taking a flat of shells out and working on one particular shot. Alternatively, and I think Gil and Vicki, and certainly almost most of the coaches I know that I have a lot of respect for, will make you move around.
Does that mean you have respect for us?
Yes, sir, it does.
I just wanted to quantify that just for the people who don't know who you are. I want to make sure. I'm just saying.
Is that we're not going to let you stick on one target. And yes, you may take 10, 15, even 20 shots, but you're going to be moved around to other targets. what goes on in the two differences is that when you sit there and work for a very long period of time on one particular element, you are doing what is essentially what is described in the literature as block training. When you move things around, you recalculate, re-challenge yourself, you're doing random training. Block training reinforces, as does repeated episodes of smaller elements, a behavior by wrapping around neural fibers with myelin. So those particular networks become faster. What happens in random practice is that you're making the brain work the cells' connections more. So in other words, you are building more and more connections, not just making faster connections that already exist. Okay, how do we know that? Well, in the last 5 years, technology has advanced to the point where we can turn off certain areas in your brain, and because of what's called functional MRI, we know that under certain challenges, which are processing challenges, there are specific areas in the frontal and prefrontal area of the brain that are the ones that really work hard. We can turn those small areas off. When we turn those small areas off and test for retention of skill and reduced errors, the processing centers being turned off makes random training look exactly like block training. That is, down the line with block training, you will see that you can't retain what you thought you really got good at, and your error rate doesn't improve. With random training, it does get better, and you retain better. And this has been looked at out even several months in different training areas, not only classroom work like mathematics, but in music and actually in a few other sports. Unfortunately, not specifically in shooting, but the crossover in tennis and elsewhere is pretty strong.
Let me add something to that. I know I did a coaching hour on it, and I think I called it the Tony Morrow gag factor. I had Tony Morrow over here who punched out a AA in the master class by winning the Krieghoff Cup at the national championship. Okay, that's a hell of an accomplishment. And I had him over here, and I stole something from Lynn Marriott and Pia Nielsen on their ball toss. Mm-hmm. That you can stand by a 5-gallon bucket and drop a ball in it, walk 2 steps back, toss the ball, walk 2 steps back. There's going to be a point in which you get far enough away from that bucket to where you don't trust your toss, and the brain gets in the way. I stole from that a system that I got Tony on, and I set him up on the same left-to-right curling Shondell crosser, and I made him shoot it at 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, and 50 yards. He knew where he was going. He started at 20, he hit it, went to 30, he hit it, went to 40, lucked out and hit it, went to 50 and lost it. And what I did is I took him back down to the 20-yard line and said, okay, how does this feel? Look at that. Look what happens. Look, how does it feel when you shoot this target? And he talked to me about how it feels, and I said, okay, let's go back to 50. And I said, feel the same way and shoot that target. And he smashed it. Now, I talked him into hitting that target. But one of the things that I told Tony to go home and do is rather than going incrementally in steps back from a crosser, go 15 yards. Start at 20 and go to 35. Go back to 25 and go to 40. So that in each step that you change, it involves the mental process that block training doesn't necessarily involve. Am I on the same page, Bob?
Yes, and I'm going to come to you did a little bit of a variation, and I'll come to that, which was later in the paper. But yes, you are in the same ballpark, very strongly.
Okay. I mean, you can sit there and you can shoot the same damn shot, and I've told people to do it. I'm just as at fault as anybody. But you can shoot the same shot over and over again, but what Bob's telling us is without the same mental get ready about, okay, this is a right to left, across the barrel, medium crosser, lots of speed, see it come, stupid in front, same speed. Without that mental process, if we just go through, okay, I know the picture, same speed at the end, same speed at the end, you can do 500 of those and hit 490 of them, but the retention is not going to be as great as if we took each shot as a new thing. Is that right, Bob?
Absolutely. And in fact, you could even randomize it more than that. You could go left to right instead of right to left and come back to right to left, and you would have randomized it enough to do the same effect.
Now, what we've learned in 22 years and over 8 million rounds of ammo fired in front of us for 22, what we've learned is when we go from one shot to another, I didn't realize it, but that's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We're making the brain take the same move, but take a different mental approach. We've changed the timing and changed the distance and changed the speed. Therefore, the shooter can't use what he learned on the last one. The end product is the same, but the approach is entirely different. So what we do is we take them to different shots, maybe the same left to right, but we make them shoot different speeds, different heights, different break points, which really turns it into more random practice, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So, and I know because I'm throwing out something that challenges a lot of beliefs out there, there is a fascinating piece of work that said, well, what about people's beliefs? How does this impact the way they respond to training? And one study doing a particular block versus random training program asked all the participants before they were randomized into the different arms of the study, what did they think was going to give them the best results? Overwhelmingly, they all said block practice.
Yeah.
They asked them at the end of the study, what did you think was going to be the most successful? Without telling them what the results were, just at the end of their sessions, they said, okay, now what do you think? And they all said block practice. The reality of the study was the random people did much better in retention and error reduction out in the future. And the only hooker in this whole thing is some recent research that's not about block practice the way I've described it, but somewhat the way Gil was describing it, and that is small blocks with increasing difficulty. And although there are not many studies, it looks very much like random practice when you watch the people out in the future. So, and in the paper I sent Gil, I said, I'm talking about somewhere between 25 and 40 shots and no more than that as a mini block. And there's no number to rely on here. There just isn't enough data. It's not sitting there and doing 100, that's for sure. But something small and then moving to greater difficulty, and then maybe later on after 2 or 3 other variations of difficulty coming back to the one you started with, just as Gil just described. That looks very much like random practice in terms of retention of quality of improvement as well as error reduction in the future.
Now, I know I've got 2 of you on the line. I don't know where the Max is on the line, but I think it was 2 years ago that Ben and Shane came and shot with Max with me for a couple of days. And that was, I'm going to refer to the morning where I backed you guys up across the parking lot out into the field, and my son drives up and says, what the hell are you all doing back here? And I looked at him and I said, we're breaking targets. And I had you guys, he had a rangefinder. Remember, Shane and Ben, how I had you guys back up to 91 yards, and y'all were all breaking targets, left to right crosser at 91 yards. You remember that morning?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes. And you remember what led up to that? We were doing random blocks of training on that shot, and we kept going forward and backwards and forwards and backwards and backwards and backwards and forwards, and then we finally just said, screw it, let's go back over there. And I know you were all shocked when you hit it. You tried not to let on how shocked you were, but I could tell you were both shocked at that. You remember that?
I remember it, and I also remember we did the same thing on that teal.
Yes, sir.
We didn't back up as far across the parking lot, but we were out there 65 or 70 yards breaking that teal. And we did exactly the same thing. We shot it close. We shot it from the right. We'd back up 35 yards and move over to the left. We'd go back to the center and go back up 15 yards behind the trap, and then we'd go to the right and back up to 45 or 50 yards. And we were doing the same exercise on that bird as well.
And that's what Bob's talking about this study, and that is that just simply repeating it over and over again, although it grows myelin, it doesn't give you retention. Am I saying that right, Bob? It does grow myelin and makes the circuit fire faster, but it doesn't give you the retention that shooting it randomly does. Is that right?
Correct. And applying that to variations on that in the future that you may not have practiced.
So if we were to shoot it for 200 shots in the same place, we'd be great at the end of the practice session. But if we went to a tournament the next day and had to shoot it from an entirely different position, we wouldn't be able to draw on that practice session as well as we could have drawn on a practice session that was more random from different spots going backwards and forwards, up and back, long and short. Even though we didn't shoot 200 shots at one place, if we shot 75 or even 50 from random positions, because our brain had to figure out the new position, the retention in our ability to break the shot at the tournament would be greater from that than shooting 200 shots at the same place.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
That's right. That's correct.
Okay, guys.
Hey, Gil.
Yes, sir.
This is Ben, and I just wanted to chime in. I liken that a lot to shooting the bird, say from one position in the cage, but 3 different break points.
Yes, sir. I think Bob would agree with that, wouldn't you, Bob?
Yes.
Because it's not the fact that you hit it, it's the fact that you had to go through the mental process of diagnosing what you had to do and call on a different set of circuits in your brain and your preload to hit that target. Because everybody knows the brain can do it once it figures it out. But in order for you to retain it and recall it, you have to give it different scenarios so that it has to figure out the puzzle enough times to figure out what synchronous to fire the circuit in. Would that be right, Bob?
Yes. The more cells that are interlocked together because of problem solving, the more you are able to solve variations on the problem in the future.
Man. I'll be looking for some examples of this in your practice. I think I'm excited about this. I know that when Bob sent this to me back in October and I read it, I took it into Vicky's office and shut the door and I said, "We've been doing stuff so right," but I just didn't realize it. And she looked at me and said, "Okay, who else is agreeing with you now?" When I said snowflake, she said bullshit. No, she didn't say that. She didn't say that. But I have to tell you that it's we have seen this so many times all over the world. We've just seen it. You can sit there and do it over and over again, but you don't retain it. And actually, in reality, we stumbled into it. We realized if we had them shoot the same shot over and over again, the next day they couldn't hit it. But if we had them shoot variations of the same shot, the next day they were so much better at shooting those shots. It just is an amazing thing. Anyway, it gives us the courage to go on and keep doing what we're doing. So, that said, I'd like to talk for the next little bit on what you guys think, and just say your name and we'll start talking about it. But this segment is for the beginners who are just now joining the Knowledge Vault for a CD for them to listen to about maybe it's what you didn't learn as a beginner that you had to go back and learn. I will tell you this, that I had Doug and Shane help me and Vicki with this last year. We spent some time together, and I'm about 37 pages into writing a beginner, intermediate, and advanced program for our Knowledge Vault that talks to people about what they need to learn and why, and where they need to search it on the Knowledge Vault. And I'm defining as a beginner as a person who can shoot 50% to 68%. So I'm just going to kind of throw it open. Somebody, the first thing I tell them is, don't even think you're ever even going to be able to play this game at a moderate level if you can't move and mount the gun without thinking about it. So the gun mount is paramount. Would y'all agree that learning to move and mount the gun is perhaps the most important thing you're ever going to learn if you're ever going to enjoy shooting this game?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would say that's one of the things you're going to end up learning twice.
I think that's a good point, Jeff. I really do, because and you know, you may learn it more than twice. But
and you learn it different for different scenarios as well. I mean,
yes, you do, Ben.
There's different mounts.
Yes, and that goes back to the random practice that Bob was talking about, and that is you got to know which way to do it. And you know, you get the people that, well, I'm just going to shoot with a mounted gun, and you know, I think I shocked my wife the other day in a clinic when somebody said, well, I shoot with a mounted gun, and I just said, well, you're screwed. You know, we had their money, you understand. And that guy looked at me, and I said, he said, but I can shoot with it mounted, and I said, no, you can't. And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, because in order to know that you've got it mounted, you've got to look at the sights, right? Well, yeah. I said, if you look at the sights before you call full, guess what you're going to look at when the bird and the gun come together? Oh, no, the sights. You've got to learn to move, and you got to, like Craig said years ago, you got to dance with that gun. You got to put your time in to dance with that gun. So I think learning the move and learning the mount, I think, is paramount for any beginner. Art Romberg was not going to be able to be on tonight, but he sent me a little email when I sent out the blast about what we're going to talk about, and he said, in his opinion, don't ever let that, to quote Art, don't ever let that damn bird get ahead of that damn gun. So, and we feel like that's something that as a beginner, I think you'll struggle with. But if you'll learn the 3-bullet drill and the flashlight drill and learn how to move and mount the gun and see the bird behind the barrel, I think your ascension into the higher levels of expertise will be much more rapid. Anything else? What else do you think that the beginners need to give emphasis to?
You know, it's Shane.
Yes, sir.
You know, I think one of the things that they have to realize early on is that there are no shortcuts, and I think a lot of people, it's almost like a lot of coaches are afraid to tell people that are just getting into it that there is not a shortcut. You cannot candy coat that. There is no easy way. There are a lot of things you can do to increase the pace at which you can excel and climb the learning curve, but it's not any different, in my opinion, than when you look at someone that is playing any sport at a high level, whether it's a guy walking through the halls in high school or in college that's carrying a football, or, you know, you see the guy that's always playing basketball. He eats his lunch and he goes in the gym, and after school he's playing basketball, and on the weekends he's playing basketball, and he's good at basketball. And I think that a lot of people think that they can almost read their way into being a better shotgunner, and there's no substitute for trigger time and learning how to use that tool. And there's a ton of people out there that are looking for I almost want to say the magic pill. Well, if I take this blue pill, I'll be really great at crossers, or if I take this green pill, I can hit droppers. There is absolutely no shortcuts, and there is nothing that you can do other than go do it and practice it and learn it. And I think that if there were people that would preface that right up front with a lot of the people that are coming into the sport, it would stop a lot of the discouragement that you see, because people begin, instead of looking inwards and looking for a way to improve and become better, it almost seems to me like they get frustrated and they get dejected, and then they just want to walk off from it because they thought that they were going to get into this in 6 months, they were going to be awesome. And I think that there would be a lot more people in the sport today if they were told from the very beginning, this is not something that you're just going to do for 6 months and just be great at. You don't get up in the morning and suddenly find yourself the top brain surgeon in the world. The guy that played in the NFL didn't just wake up one day and get drafted and go to the NFL. The dudes that are driving race cars 200 miles an hour didn't just, get a driver's license at 16 and 6 months later they had their professional racing license. And so I think that I don't know why people are so afraid to apply that to this, except for the fact that a lot of people that are coming into the sport are not young people. These are successful individuals, and I almost feel like people are doing them a disservice because they don't tell them up front what they're getting into. It's almost like they're afraid to scare them instead of just telling them up front, if you're not willing to dedicate this much of your time and this much of your, your money and your extra efforts to doing this, then you're not going to get the results you're after. I mean, you preach the move and mount, and you preach to learn how to shoot, and it's almost exactly like you were talking about the guy that said, oh, well, I shoot with a mounted gun. That guy's blowing you off because he doesn't think that he needs to go home and stand in the bedroom with his shotgun and learn how to point it with a flashlight in the end of it. He already thinks that he knows better than you. You understand what I'm saying? And
I
it just,
do.
to me,
I see it every day.
And I just think that ought to be there ought to be a paper that you could just give them, that just says, okay, up front, this is what it is. And I think the other thing is a ton of people, they don't have going into it, I almost think that no one has explained to them how much into themselves they're going to have to look to be able to reach the top, to get to that level, and how much they're going to have to grow as a person. And there's just as many hours spent driving down the highway staring at a windshield in inflection trying to figure out what is holding you back as there is crossing targets and dropping targets and things shot. And everybody will tell you, I can trust a coach, I can trust this guy, yes, I trust that guy, I've known that guy for 25 years, I trust him with my life. But how many of those people trust themselves? And how many of those people can be honest with themselves? And I think that
honest with themselves is huge.
Yeah, and I think those two things are the two things that if when you signed up for the NSCA, some dude called you and said, okay, you have to listen to this.
Do you have what it takes?
Yeah, I mean, but I'm serious though, because I think that they need to understand that if all you want to do is go out and shoot 2 rounds of 5-stand and put your gun in the truck and burn a sausage and drink a 6-pack of beer with your buddies, that's one thing. But if you really think that you're going to show up and be a stud with a shotgun because you paid Gil Ash, I spent this much money with Tom Mack, or I spent this much money with this guy over here, or whatever, it's not going to happen. I mean, you're going to be lighter in the wallet, but you're not any closer to being good with a shotgun than you were when you showed up.
Shane reflects back on 4 pages in Golf Flow where he describes the difference between mastery and ego.
There you go, baby.
There you go,
baby. Yeah.
Absolutely. To me, that's the 2 biggest things that I try to tell everyone, because I have a lot of people come to me and they're like, well, what is it that you think sets the top 10 or 15% out from everyone else? And that's the 2 things I tell them, is that there's no shortcuts. And when I started, I thought I was just going to shoot and shoot and shoot, and I was just going to get there faster than everybody else. And that is wrong. It's not going to happen. But it's coming. And I just think that everyone would get a whole bunch of the frustration and the unrealistic expectation out of the way if someone would have those conversations with those people right up front. If they understood that going in, then, and I don't know why. I have several friends that are level 1, level 2 NSCA instructors, and there's absolutely nothing in that curriculum about that. Nothing. No one even wants to talk about it. I'm a level 4 NSCA instructor. Great. But all you focus on is how to teach that guy to hit that target that he can't hit that day. And you're not teaching them. All you're doing is you're like the little boy with his finger in the dike. You're just going up there and sticking your finger in the hole and plugging it up so they can hit the target with you while you're standing there. And every one of us knows in 6 weeks that same shooter can't hit that same target.
That would be block practice.
Yeah, but I mean,
they teach you in the program.
There's another version of that called block head practice, which is what he's alluding to.
Wait. I have that copyrighted.
Is that you, Eagle?
Yes, this is John Eagle, and I would say there's a couple things that early on about what Shane was talking about. The only reason I go back to Jill and Vicki is because of something that I read right at the start, and the question was, what are you willing to give up to get better? And to me, that was the most sensible thing because it implies you're going to have to give something up. But I think if I was going to tell somebody from the beginning, the conversation that we've had a lot over the last year is that you're going to have questions, you're going to have things that you can't do yourself, but the most important decision you're going to make is who can help you, because everybody has an opinion, everybody says there's an expert, but unless they have somehow stumbled on the answer to that particular question, unless they are exactly at your level of expertise, unless they shoot exactly the same way with the same gun speed, or unless they're aware of all those factors in that they really are a really good coach, probably what you're getting is not going to help you. And
say that another way, in a little more blunt way.
Most people, if they're not at the same moment you are in shooting a particular target,
they don't have the same amount of experience you've got.
If they don't have the same amount of experience and they don't shoot the same way you do, a lot of their help is not going to be helpful.
Let me see if I can. I want you to either agree or disagree with this statement.
Okay.
If you're a D-class shooter and you go take a lesson from a master class shooter, are you going to be able to implement what he tells you?
He could be a good teacher, but probably not just as you've stated it.
Okay. All right.
No, I have to qualify that, but because I think there are some truisms, but if you don't have somebody that can say something in a different way, we're going back to the discussion that was just on the Knowledge Vault. Keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on the ball. Okay, I heard that 4,000 times in my baseball career, and it wasn't until 3,999 of them had gone back that I even started to know what that meant.
Have you read my post on that thread?
I have. Okay. And the thing is that people can say the right thing,
yes,
and you don't understand it.
The right thing the wrong way.
Exactly. But I can tell you that 99% of the time, when people are standing outside the cage, and what you hear, how much have you heard it? You know, oh, you're behind that one. They can't see the shot stream. They didn't watch you shoot the target. They have no idea.
I gotta say this just because I experienced this on Sunday. I was shooting with two other guys. An A-class shooter, pretty decent, was getting smoked by a quartering target that turned into a crossing target. I could see he was starting his gun behind the target. He was finishing his gun behind the target. He never was anywhere near the target. And one of the other guy that we were shooting with was trying to be helpful. Oh, you're in front of it. How do you know that? Oh, I could see his wad. I said, he's not in front of it. I could see, but I'm not going to say anything to him because he didn't ask, and it's not my place to coach him. But I could see the shot stream. I could see the target. I could see the gun. None of them were ever in the same zip code together. And this guy's, and he's up there telling them that. And it was 3 or 4 stations. Oh, you're behind it. You're in front of it. You're doing that. You're doing this. I'm just minding my own business in the corner because nobody asked my opinion, and I'm not going to give it. And I know from my own personal experience how distracting it can be when somebody tries to help you when you're having trouble. But exactly to that point, if you don't understand, if you can't see what the shooter is doing and understand how they shoot, understand how to teach them to shoot, you're never going to connect with them. You're never going to deliver useful information. It's sort of the generalization of if you're a B class shooter and you go to an A class instructor, or you're and I would argue, frankly, that the guys who've shot longer have a better chance of understanding different shooting methods and might have a better chance of coaching a more beginning shooter. But at the end of the day, if you can't teach and you can't deliver that information to them in a way that they can understand it, they're never going to go anywhere, and it's going to do a lot more damage, right? This was a 4-pair station. The guy got progressively farther behind the station and screwed up his move progressively worse each time because of the information he was getting from the guy standing behind him.
Is this the same guy that said, dude, if that target was pulling a 20-foot trailer, you would have centered the trailer?
No, that was a different station. I was thinking real hard about saying that.
Well, getting back to your question, if I could, I think that what has been discussed is very important. One of the next steps is they have to learn how to use their eyes.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And understanding, and I think I've told everybody on this call this very same thing, and we've had thousands of people tell us this, and that is that they read the Fix-It book, they go through 3 classes, they read the Fix-It book again, and it's like they never read it because the same words mean something different. And as you go through the levels of proficiency in this game, the same words mean something different simply because you can apply that at a higher level. Focus in the beginning is physiological focus on the target and accepting. It's just like John Eagle in that post that I talked about when I talked about focus ratios. You remember that?
Yep.
And there's not a lot of people that can understand that post. For you guys that don't know, it's on the forum under Kevin put a post up there about how do you look at the target. And I started out to a real short answer, but I don't know why, but I just ended up writing a whole chapter right there for some reason. It's not like me, but I did it anyway. I talked about focus in the beginning being actual acute focus on the target, and in the end game, it's more concentration on, inferring that once you understand how to focus, then you have to begin to focus visually, but you also focus mentally at the same time, and focus becomes, you don't have to work to focus anymore. It's an automatic thing. And it's just you move to a different level. Now I'm going to try to summarize what John Eagle was saying. So many times as you're trying to get better, if you see a guy that can shoot better than you, you go ask him what he's seeing. The problem with that is you can't see what he sees without having the same number of targets broken over the gun. Because what he sees or perceives is based on not what his eyes see, but how much experience his brain has in interpreting the situation that he's in, and that he finds himself in, and that he predicts on how he's going to get out of it. And that's why when beginning shooters go to a top shooter to get a lesson, I feel sorry for them because they can't do it. Now, the top shooter can put them in blocked practice and get them to shoot the same shot over and over again, and they'll feel good. But when they leave, they haven't learned anything. Would you agree with that, John Eagle?
I would. I think a couple things. The practical situation is a beginning shooter has to learn how to politely say thank you very much and either disregard or file away whatever information they've gotten. Because it can be, if you tell a guy, you're just plain wrong, that upsets the squad and upsets your day, and so you really do have to learn. I mean, it's like the how much lead 3 feet answer, you know. You have to have something ready for
question.
that.
Yeah, it's the old question of why were you where you were, not where you were.
There you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when somebody, you know, you have to learn when you really need help and what kind of help you really need.
Boy, that's a huge degree of internal reflection and being able to replay against some standard that you've developed in the past to be able to pull that off. And I think that's beyond most people.
Okay, I might have to agree with that.
Oh, no, reluctantly.
No, not reluctantly at all. I just think that it would be better to say that you just can't listen to everybody. And
Go see Gil and Vicky. Go see Gil and Vicky. They know what they're talking about.
There are limits even there.
Can I tack something onto that? I don't know if it was in the same. I don't know if it was in the same paper, but if not, it was in another paper that I sent you. There was a study done about people's perceptions and willingness to accept solutions to problems, and even their willingness to define a problem. And a lot of it had to do with their ego and what the solution was to the problem. Right? If the solution was unpalatable, they were less likely to acknowledge the problem, or they were more likely to define the problem in a different way so that the solution was something palatable. So if you look at that the article was all about climate change and politics, and it's pretty heated in terms of today's discussions about the political perspectives on climate change and all that sort of stuff. But the fundamental research, I think, applies here too, because you look at a guy who's to some of the stuff we talked about earlier, he's not willing to admit that fundamentally the answer to his need to improve is that he has to practice and he has to do the basic blocking and tackling that's necessary to learn all the basic parts of his skill set. He'd much rather go out and buy a new token or, ask a great shooter, if you shoot outs and eighth loads that go 1350, that's what I should shoot because obviously that'll make me better because you do it. And there's a lot more behind that answer than just that's what I shoot. It's a more skilled shooter. He has more time. He has more experience, whatever. But people want to take the shortcut because that's the palatable answer. That's the thing that connects with their ego and allows them to say, if I buy this thing or I do this shortcut, I'll be able to skip ahead, right? I mean, we heard 3 or 4 different definitions of the same thing, but there's definitely some people talking about research that points to that as part of your ego.
Yeah, and the paper you sent me applies directly to the gun mount situation. Because if a person looks at learning to mount the gun as something that he doesn't want to do, he is never going to admit that the root cause of his inability to hit that target is because he can't mount the gun. That doesn't exist in his mind because the solution is not palatable to him, so he's not going to admit or give credence to the fact that that is his problem. He's going to always look in other areas when the simple thing is, hey, dude, learn to mount the gun. Right, Jeff?
Exactly. We search for there's so many comic routines, and I believe even someone once said sometimes the simplest explanation is the answer. But there's all these history, all these desires to have some complex explanation for a simple problem. So yeah, I would agree with that completely.
Yeah, Rockham's razor.
Let me change mine just a little. I want to remind you of Mencken's statement, which was for every complicated problem, there's a perfectly simple solution, and it's always wrong.
Always wrong, yes.
Yes.
I'm with you 100%. Yeah,
but for Dr. Bob, I agree, and so I would say is to go from a beginning shooter to an intermediate, you must know that you are going to need help to do that.
Oh, yeah.
It certainly saves a lot of money on your shooting expenses.
Yeah, the molar chokes and the titanium chokes and yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's and we've talked about it on this coaching hour hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. They're looking to buy their way to the next target, and you're not going to do that. You're just absolutely not going to do it. It's going to take hard work, and it's going to take a certain amount of time, and it takes you're going to have to give something up. Just like I told John Eagle, what are you going to give up? And he looked at me like I had three noses, and I said, no, dude, you don't come to this game with an empty dance card. You're already doing 25 hours worth of stuff in a 24-hour day, and you've got to give something up. And it's a difficult thing for most people to fathom. One of the things that I talked about in the preamble to the intermediate, beginner, intermediate, and advanced program is why you do this. I think that people need to. Which, if you were to come to me today and say, I want to take this game up and I want to get as good as I can get, first thing I'm going to say is what you're going to give up. Then I'm going to say, okay, how much time do you have to devote to it? And just how good is good? And you're not going to know the answer to those questions because you're not going to know how long it's really going to take. But one of the things that I'm going to ask you is, how long do you see yourself doing this? And there's really only three answers. I don't know, or until I decide to quit or get tired of doing it, which really means until your ability to handle the amount of failure to really get better runs out, or the amount of effort, time, and money it's going to take to get better exceeds your commitment. Or the third answer is for the rest of my life. The people that will freely admit that this is something that they might want to do for the rest of their life are going to excel much more quickly, and they're going to look at this as something that they're going to slowly get into and learn well. And I have to tell you, without exception, the shooters that we've had come to us and say, we want to do this the rest of our life, or it could be something we could do the rest of our life. We're looking at it from that standpoint. Those are the people who have been methodical. Those are the people who have learned well what they've learned. Those are the people who have not wanted to take the shortcut. They've come back for lessons. They call us when they have a decision to make. We talk about not only decisions in sporting clays, but we talk about decisions in their personal life. We talk about everything. We help them become honest with themselves, and those are the people, the ones that say, this may be something I want to do for the rest of my life. There's something about that rest of my life commitment that makes them want to learn well everything that they learn at every level. And that common thread is there. I must tell you, it is there. And research will prove me out. I've read several papers on that. So we're out of time. I find myself thoroughly enjoying this conversation. We're probably going to do this again next month. We'll talk a little bit more about beginners because you're all going to listen to this and think of something else. And we're going to lead in with beginners next time. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the intermediate shooters and what they have to learn in order to stumble around where everybody gets caught the most, and that's in the intermediate phase. And what they have to learn to get into the advanced phase. And then the next month we're probably going to talk about when you're in the advanced phase, what you actually have to learn to actually compete at the top level. So thanks everybody for participating. You've made this hour wonderful for us. I'm sorry we were a week late, but we had some unintended circumstances get a hold of us. But it was a great hour, and I enjoyed it. And good night, everybody.